Not put all my money in the dollar system. I will put most of my money in the dollar system, but I will put some in the Chinese superhighway. The Americans see that. The smart people in Washington see this as a serious threat.
大家有没有想过一个极其诡异的问题？一个国家按理说欠的债越多，它应该越衰弱，越容易破产才对吧？就像当年的大英帝国一样。可是现在的美国背着30几万亿美元的天量债务，不仅没破产，反而还能满世界耀武扬威，制裁这个打压那个。他凭什么能做到越欠钱越强大？这种反人类常识的吸血鬼操作到底是怎么玩转的？最近，一位曾经被西方金融体系毒打过的明白人，希腊前财长瓦鲁法基斯，在演讲中直接扒下了美国霸权的底裤。他不仅把美国这个全球最大的庞氏骗局拆解得明明白白，更爆出了一个让华盛顿夜不能寐的惊天内幕：美国现在疯狂打压中国，根本不是因为什么台湾问题，也不是因为什么军事威胁。美国真正害怕中国的，竟然是我们每天都在用的一个东西。阿欣带你听听，这位欧洲前高官是如何揭开中美冷战最核心也最致命的底牌的。
We go straight to that. Why is the United States hegemonic? Remember that after the Second World War, the United States came out of the war as the only creditor economy, except Switzerland, but that doesn't count. Right? The only creditor economy, the only economy that was in a surplus. It had a trade surplus. It sold more stuff than it imported. Was the United States of America. Its factories were intact. They were not destroyed like across continental Europe or Japan. It wasn't bankrupt like this country was. And remember why you were bankrupt? Because you owed all this money to the Americans because they didn't give you a single bullet during the Second World War that they didn't charge you for and demand payment afterwards, which meant that post-war Britain was bankrupt. It was completely in a debtor's prison owned by the United States.
We call that debtor's prison the special relationship.
It's a special relationship, yes, indeed. We call the same thing, that this is what's happening to Greece now. We're a debtor's prison, but we have a very special relationship with Brussels. Of the same ilk as you do with the United States, or back then in 1945. Okay? So they came out of it with their factories having their productivity and production capacities being massively enhanced by the Second World War. By 1945, the United States industry was capable of producing 8 times more stuff than it was in 1941, Pearl Harbor, just before Pearl Harbor. 8 times more stuff. And they created, remember the Bretton Woods system? Some of you who are older will remember that the British pound was fixed, with a fixed exchange rate to the dollar. Essentially, we had a dollar. All of us, the Greeks, the Germans, the French, the Italians, we had our own currencies, but it was a fixed exchange rate with the dollar. Essentially, we had a dollar. There were capital controls. We couldn't convert as much of our currency as we wanted to the dollar, but it was a fixed exchange rate. It was essentially a currency union. We were in the dollar zone between 1944 and 1971, when Richard Nixon destroyed the Bretton Woods system that the Americans had created. He destroyed it because the whole point about the Bretton Woods system was that it was a managed international dollar system predicated upon, based upon, the American trade surplus. By the late 60s, there was no... So here we have a hegemonic power in 1970-71 that is now into the red. Now, what happened to the British Empire when it went into the red? It collapsed. What happened to the Roman Empire? It collapsed. Every time a major power goes into the red, it starts fading. And the fall is very close. In the case of the United States, between 1971 and 2020, let's say, the beginning of the pandemic, its hegemony and power increased exponentially along with its trade deficit. It is the only power in the world that became stronger as a result of going deeper into a deficit. That has never happened before. How did they succeed in doing it? And this is your answer. By maintaining a strict monopoly on international payments. It was the only country in the history of the planet that had a currency which was in demand. People wanted the dollar, even if they didn't want to buy anything from the Americans. Because when you put petrol in your car, if you still have a petrol car, okay, even if it is a company owned by the Dutch, and it buys oil drilled in, let's say, Nigeria, from a Nigerian company, and there's no American involved at all. Every time, because it's denominated in dollars, every time you fill up your petrol tank, you are demanding dollars. You have to convert pounds or yen or euros into dollars. So the ownership of the international payment system is what allows the United States, much more so than the ubiquitous US Army, Navy, and Air Force, to maintain its hegemony. Kissinger knew that. I mentioned that in the book. In 1970, he asked his people around him. Kissinger back then was National Security Council. He was a national security advisor to Nixon before he became Foreign Secretary. And he said to them, how are we going to maintain our hegemony if we are in the red? And the answer he got was, we'll make other people, other capitalists from the rest of the world, pay for our deficits. This is what has been happening. But why is it that they can do that? Because they have the monopoly of the payment system internationally. What WeChat does, it threatens that monopoly. Remember the story with the German manufacturer? He's out of the dollar system. And with the war in Ukraine, something remarkable happened, because WeChat, on the one hand, and the Central Bank of China, having created a digital currency, its own publicly owned app that allows you to make free payments in renminbi, in the Chinese currency. So there are two things you can use to make international payments for free as a foreigner, as a Briton. You don't have to be Chinese. You have two. You have WeChat and you have the digital currency of the Central Bank of China. There are, as we speak, 210 million accounts of the digital currency. And business people can use it around the world to make free payments without bypassing the dollar system. That is a clear and present mortal danger for American hegemony. The reason why Donald Trump started the Cold War against China, this is my theory in the book. Why did he start attacking Huawei and then ZTE? And then you may say, of course, but Donald Trump is a madman. He would attack anyone just for the sake of it. Well, Joe Biden comes in as the anti-Trump President of the United States. And what does he do with the Cold War that Trump had started? Does he claw back? Does he retreat from it? No, he turbocharges it. He comes out with a declaration in the fall of 2021, essentially sending the message to China, we are going to stop you from becoming an advanced economy by banning all sales of advanced microchips, which is essentially, it's like in 1800 banning steam engines. The export of steam engines to Germany. This is like saying, we are declaring economic warfare against you. And why does he do that? The argument that it's because of Taiwan is rubbish. Nothing has changed about Taiwan. The one China policy had always been accepted by the West since Nixon went to Beijing. So it's not that. It's not that China is building up its army or its navy. I will believe that only when I see Chinese destroyers and frigates outside Los Angeles. For the time being, all I see is American warships outside Shanghai. So none of that makes sense. What makes sense is that the Chinese payment systems, which brings together Chinese finance and Chinese cloud capital in a most effective way, just visit WeChat and you'll see what I mean, is a mortal danger for the monopoly of the dollar. The war in Ukraine did something quite interesting. This superhighway of all singing, all dancing, digital payments, Chinese payments, the WeChat and the digital currency of the Central Bank of China, that was already there. But it's like building a superhighway, you can imagine 5 lanes on each side and a big, spanking new, beautiful highway with no cars on it. Because if you were a capitalist, even if you were a Chinese capitalist, you still wanted to use the dollar. Because if you produce aluminum in Shenzhen, you want to sell most of it to the Americans. So you want to sell it for dollars. And then you take the dollars and you take it to Wall Street and you buy American bonds and you buy real estate in Miami and so on. So the Chinese capitalists didn't even want to use this superhighway of payments. But the moment the United States, together with the European Union, confiscated $450 billion worth of Russian money, I'm not judging this. I'm not saying they should have done it or not have done it. I'm simply saying they did it. So imagine you are a Saudi Arabian sheikh, or the emir of some emirate, or some Indonesian bigwig, or Malaysian. And you think, oh my God, they confiscated 450 billion smackers because they didn't like their policies. Well, they may not like me tomorrow because I'm not the best guy in the world. They know that, right? Well, maybe I should hedge my bets, not put all my money in the dollar system. I will put most of my money in the dollar system, but I will put some in the Chinese superhighway. The Americans see that. The smart people in Washington see this as a serious threat. Because if they lose the monopoly of the dollar system, of the payment system internationally, that's it. The United States is finished. They're deeply in the red. They have a huge budget deficit and a huge trade deficit. which they manage to turn into a strength only as long as the Chinese do not touch their monopoly. Chinese big tech does.
听完这位希腊前财长的犀利演讲，阿辛在茶水间里真的是感到一种醍醐灌顶的畅快。什么叫看透本质？这就叫看透本质。过去这几年，美国天天拿台湾说事，满嘴的民主自由，搞得好像中国明天就要开着军舰去占领洛杉矶一样。但这位欧洲高官直接打脸，这是鬼话。美国为什么这么害怕中国？为什么特朗普发起了科技冷战，拜登上台后不仅不撤销，反而变本加厉地封锁高端芯片？因为他们看到了自己的死穴正在被中国捏住。大家品一品财长拆解的那个逻辑，太毒了。美国在1971年之后，本质上就变成了一个拿着枪的强盗加老赖。他靠着垄断 SWIFT 系统和美元霸权，强迫全世界，你买中东的石油，你买非洲的矿，哪怕没有美国人参与，你也得用美元结算。这样一来，美国就可以无限印发绿纸，让全世界的人用真金白银的商品来替他偿还那还不完的烂账。这是一场长达半个世纪的合法的全球抢劫。但现在中国干了一件什么事？我们在不知不觉中修了一条数字支付的高速公路，微信支付和中国央行的数字人民币。这条高速公路上不仅没有美国的收费站，最关键的是它不归华尔街管，这才是让美国人真正感到末日降临的原因。你以为美国封杀华为、中兴是因为他们手机卖得好吗？错，是因为华为们在全世界搭建了这套独立于美国之外的网络基础设施。而最具有戏剧性、最讽刺的一幕，恰恰是美国人自己亲手促成的。财长说得好，以前中国修了这条高速公路，但没人跑，因为大家都习惯了用美元。可是俄乌冲突一爆发，美国和欧洲一拍脑门，直接没收了俄罗斯4500亿美元的资产。这一招看起来很爽，实际上是蠢到家了。你想想，如果你是沙特的王储，或者是印尼的大亨，你看到这一幕，你心里慌不慌？你会想，今天他能因为不喜欢普京抢了俄罗斯的钱，明天他要是看我不顺眼，我的钱不也就没了吗？所以这帮中东土豪、全球富豪们下得赶紧把鸡蛋分到不同的篮子里，悄悄地把资产转移到了那条中国修的数字高速公路上。是美国自己的强盗行径，硬生生把客户逼到了中国的支付系统里，亲手砸烂了美元信用的招牌。这就叫机关算尽太聪明，反误了卿卿性命。所以朋友们，下次再看到美国在南海、在台海搞事情，大家千万别被表面的军事对峙给忽悠了，那不过是掩饰他们内心极度虚弱和恐慌的障眼法。他们真正恐惧的不是中国的导弹，而是中国正在拆除他们那台用来吸血全世界的印钞机。一个靠印纸片收割全世界来维持霸权的旧帝国，在遇到一个踏踏实实搞基建、搞科技，还提供安全支付通道的新兴强国时，他的黄昏就已经注定了。这才是百年未有之大变局的最终章。好了，今天茶水间的深度复盘就到这里。你觉得美国的金融霸权还能撑多久？欢迎在评论区留下你的高见。别忘了点赞、订阅阿欣的茶水间，让我们一起看透这魔幻的世界大戏。下期再见。